Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are on this fast forward planet, where so many things are happening. It can feel overwhelming. We're at the end of a year that was tumultuous for climate. We're at the end of we're in the early stages of a century that's going to be tumultuous for climate and biodiversity. It's easy to feel overwhelmed and paralyzed sometimes. And I've brought together a few folks to just explore paths forward, ranging from poetry to blogging. I still call it blogging, even
No,
though
I get it.
I'm glad Sam might agree. I've been blogging since I started my .earth enterprise at the New York Times back in 2007. And the communication environment is just as turbulent as the actual environment. In fact, maybe more so. So let's just get started here today. I'm just wonderfully happy to have on Yvonne Reddick, who's a British scholar and poet and filmmaker and creator who is focused on this Anthropocene question, as I have been for a long time. And Sam, how do you pronounce your last name, Sam?
Maddie, Matty.
Yeah.
It's pronounced as though there's two T's, but yeah, it's like Croatian originally or something. It sounds like it should be the pilot term, Matey, but no, it's Maddie. So thank you.
Yeah. I should have asked that earlier. So, and Sam is a hypervelocity blogger of good news, stuff that's matters that doesn't really make it through the media filters, because I've been in the media for 40 years. I've been a journalist, and it's very rare for me to, through all that time, if you looked at the stories I wrote for the New York Times and magazines and the like, they mostly are focused on the dire, the things that need to change that aren't changing, and that's the way it should be. But then we miss the full landscape of what's going on in the world, and that can be incredibly frustrating. So Ed Begley Jr., an actor for decades in the United States, 50 years, he's supposed to join too. He may be tied up because of his new book, so hopefully he'll be on in a few minutes as well. So let's just get started. I wanted to start by just asking you, like, how did you become who you are so far? And let's start with Yvonne. What drove you into writing and poetry, and then what brought your poetry focus into something as big and quirky as the Anthropocene?
It's quite a long story that begins in childhood, really. So I grew up in Aberdeen, I grew up in the southeast of England, and I grew up in Kuwait. And I grew up in two different oil towns. My father was a petroleum engineer. And at the same time, my family had this interest in the outdoors, in nature, in outdoor pursuits. And my dad was madly keen on hiking. Even in Kuwait, sometimes we'd go for a hike in the desert. And it was this really quite interesting combination of my family members who worked in fossil fuel industries, and yet my mother, who was a biologist and had this quite deep understanding of wildlife and plants, and took me out into the garden and into the woods. And I grew up at a time when people were becoming increasingly aware of threats to the environment. Firstly, pollution and conservation issues. These were all over popular culture. I had a game called the Nature Trail game when I was a kid, and the threats included litter and rubbish and pollution. A little bit later on, there was even an animation on BBC TV for kids about what we called back then the greenhouse effect. So
hold on one second, just so I can introduce Ed Begley Jr., who just popped on. Hey, Ed, it's been a while.
Yes, can you hear me okay? Andy, forgive me for butting in. I didn't realize we were live right away.
Oh, yeah, no, that's fine.
Yeah.
We were just getting introductions. Ed Begley Jr., actor extraordinaire and a green force for nature for such a long time.
I'm going to put it in the proper format here.
So that sounds good. And we're getting we can read your palm in the meantime. There we go. That's great.
Sorry, I was waiting at the wrong link. I guess the link changed at the last minute.
Oh, I probably screwed something up. But
no worries. I'm happy to be with you all, and sorry for interrupting. I'm shutting up and listening to what was being said. Thank you.
Okay, great. So I was just having Yvonne Reddick, who's a poet, focused on this thing called the Anthropocene. Like I have been for a long time, and she's in England and has written poetry. She was just explaining what drew her to writing, and then what drew her to writing about the environment and this question of the human journey on the planet. So I'll just let her get back to it, and then we'll go around the circle. And it's just great to have you all here again. So Yvonne, Yvonne, you were in Kuwait, and remember, and I've been reading in your work about your family background, your father in the oil industry, etc. So just take us a little further through that loop, including
Sure.
Kuwait.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a pretty amazing experience. And yeah, I was conscious that I was there as a Westerner arriving 4 years after the first Gulf War. And it put me in this quite interesting position as a human being and as a concerned person who was interested in environmental issues. I was fully aware that, you know, the civilization I depend on and I am part of is addicted to oil. And yet I was also aware of exactly what it was doing to the climate. And if I think about a lot of the objects that surround me today in my house, many of these will still be petroleum derived. And I think there's a greater awareness among young people now that there is a need to start moving away from fossil fuels fast. And we're seeing very interesting political things happening at the latest COP, aren't we, with the debates surrounding that. So I guess I started my career working on authors who were also environmental activists. And I'd read books like Watership Down when I was a kid, classic children's story about a warren full of rabbits who have to move because there's a housing estate that is going to uproot them from their home and they have to find a safe place to live. And I think writing brought me to these issues. And the idea of the Anthropocene has interested me for a long time. I know, Andy, you actually had a term, the Anthropocene, that predates that very famous article from 2000 about the idea of the Anthropocene. It may be beginning with the Industrial Revolution. And there's a lot of debate recently about what the Anthropocene might be, when it might begin. Some people say, oh, it's definitely linked to capitalism. Other people say, definitely the Industrial Revolution and climate change. Another idea is the extinction of large-bodied megafauna on the land. There are other ideas surrounding the invasion of the Americas by Europeans, colonialism, slavery.
Right.
The idea is that it's a massive, massive change to Earth systems caused by the actions of people, some much more than others. And artists are responding to this and writers are responding to this in really quite creative and fascinating ways.
That's great, and you have a book out called Anthropocene Poetry, that,
do.
along with your own poems. Yeah, we'll get to that in a minute. I will, and
Sure.
actually, hopefully, we'll get. I've queued up some of your poems and the like, so we can explore that work too. So Sam Matty, so you're a geospatial specialist focused on environmental change and the like, and you've got some. I've been reading some papers you've been involved with, technical papers, and then you started this thing called the Weekly Anthropocene a while ago, and you moved it to Substack, where I now live as a blogger. So tell us a little quick snippet of your life journey. What got you into geography and environmental change and risk, and then what made you such a peripatetic and active blogger with this Weekly Anthropocene project?
Thank you. Well, I'd say fundamentally, really, who I am ultimately goes back to the fact that my parents chose to homeschool me, sort of the reverse of sort of the religious white homeschooling movement that's pretty common in America. They wanted sort of a more STEM-focused and sort of liberal arts-focused education, and they wanted to be able to sort of let me learn at my own pace and sort of study ahead of my age level and stuff like that. So I was able to just spend lots of childhood days reading, minutely going through world atlases, which I think started my love of maps, and sort of just being able to continue studying and learn at my own pace. And that led to eventually a really profound interest in environmental science and climate change, because since like a very young age when I read about this, I think my first exposure to the issue was An Inconvenient Truth when I was about 7, the classic Al Gore film and book.
So film matters.
Yeah. And to me, I think I actually read the book first and then I read the film or something, but yeah, both were great. And then I sort of realized, wow, like this is the planets on the table. This is something that'll show up in geological time. This is something that is really, really important, maybe the most important thing, a fundamental change of the way that the only life supporting planet we know of works. So so I've just was fascinated by that since childhood, studied about it, wrote sort of a very proto version of my current newsletter for friends and family when I was like 10 to 14. Just basically me sort of trying to learn about this and process it and share information with other people. Then I mentioned I learned at my own pace, so I was actually able to start college when I was 15 and graduate with my bachelor's in environmental science when I was 18. So so that was really helpful as well. And
That's amazing.
I went to the University of Southern Maine because that was the only college I could walk to from where I lived, and I didn't want to move out at 15. And they had a great environmental science department, which was total happenstance because we didn't expect that I would need to walk to college when we moved there. But it's amazing, great place, USM, totally can recommend it. And it was while I was at USM, alongside some other stuff, I interned with Maine Conservation Voters, did some voter registration work in the 2018 midterms, set up a student group, bunch of other stuff. But it was during that period that I started the weekly Anthropocene. And that was originally it was almost just a form of like therapy for myself, like just going to say, hey, okay, interesting stuff's going on. Like even though like Trump is president and horrible stuff is happening, there's actually like record renewable energy installations, and we're starting to see some interesting integration of technology into wildlife conservation, and it's generally interesting stuff. And yeah, that's grown over the years. And what I have been amazed by is that since 2018, the climate picture has gotten so much better. Pull this up. This should be like referenced by every major newspaper every week, this story. Because when I was a little kid learning about this, we kind of looked screwed. We looked like we were going to build coal plants until 2100, that China and Indonesia and India and everyone would build coal plants all the way to industrialize, and we were going to hit like 5 degrees Celsius warming by 2100, which might have been like a serious, like massive, like threat to civilization level apocalypse. But that's probably not going to happen. It's lots of climate change is still going to happen, but if you look at this graph, like the pre-Paris policy had us online for much higher CO2 emissions by mid-century, and policy shifts since before Paris could peak CO2 emissions as soon as 2023. And the latest, like the pledges this year, like and these pledges, by the way, these aren't just empty words. The U.S. actually met its 2020 climate goal that Obama set, mostly even though Trump was president when we met that climate goal, and there was really no government action on climate change. We met that just because renewable energy is so economically cost competitive now. There's really amazing progress being made. We have cut the expected warming by the end of century in half. And it's hard to focus on that when we've already had like a degree and change of warming. We're probably going to cross 1.5 degrees in the next 10 years. And we're seeing, climate disasters everywhere. And that is awful and that is horrifying. And if you sort of say, hey, wait a minute, it's actually half as bad. It's probably by 2100 going to be half as bad as it looked like it was going to be in 2005. That sounds like you're saying, well, don't worry about it. But no, like that's sort of like saying, like in a game or something, like a sports game, like that's like saying, hey, we have points on the board, we're still in this thing, we have a chance to get out there and play. And they're like saying, no, hey, if you say that we're doing anything good or that we have any points, you're saying that like that you're denying the fact that the other team has points. Like
right.
There's this effort to reduce everything to a binary. So are you saying it's all good or are you saying it's all bad? And there is a lot of media doing incredibly great and valuable work pointing out the bad things happening. And I don't want to gainsay that at all. And that is very important for identifying problems and issues and being sort of society's warning sign and alarm system. And what I am trying to highlight is, like in this chart again, the exponential growth of so many amazing renewable technologies. What I am trying to highlight is that some amazingly good stuff is happening. And there is often good reporting on it, but it doesn't get emphasized. Like it doesn't make the front page, it doesn't get the clicks, it even gets headlines that sort of seem negative, even if it's a positive story.
Right.
So, and overwhelmingly, this has been like the Paris Agreement was great. Like there's been some good diplomatic efforts. The Inflation Reduction Act was unbelievably amazing. I wake up out like some of you listening probably don't know what the Inflation Reduction Act is, and that is like if you lived in the 1930s and didn't know about the New Deal. Like the Inflation Reduction Act that Biden passed in August 2022 due to like an amazing last-minute political compromise is unbelievably freaking amazing. Like in my opinion, environmental groups should have just closed ranks after that was passed and focused on promoting the Inflation Reduction Act until Biden got reelected, and then try to push him on other issues like LNG. Like, because the Inflation Reduction Act is such a big deal. It is uncapped federal tax credits for renewable energy. It is like hardwiring renewable energy into the American economy for the next 10 years. And literally, it will be profitable to build renewable energy in America for the next 10 years.
Yeah.
Like, regardless of how broader economic indicators go. It'll actually
So-
get more profitable if there's a recession because there's guaranteed federal money no matter what the broader economy is like. So there's amazing stuff happening. We're making huge progress with the clean energy transition that is already notably reducing the risk of catastrophic climate change. And that means we should go further and faster and learn on what we can do and can do better. But and the similar stories in wildlife conservation, tiger, blue whale, white rhino, black rhino, and many other populations have increased substantially in the last 10 years. And I'm not trying to downplay the big issues. I'm trying to say we're still in this. The planet's on the table. What we do matters.
Well, this is great, and you know, I think that's a good transition to Ed. Ed, I think I first met you face to face in the mid 2000, like 2006 or so, and then
Yes.
and then you were on my on the New York Times. We did a little eco chat, and but you go way back, and you've seen this entire curve of environmentalism from the first Earth Day forward, and you are endlessly. I think you're both realistic and optimistic at the same time. So when you hear a young guy like Sam, does it? How do you feel? And maybe for those who haven't followed your career, give a quick thumbnail of what's in your book. Ha ha ha. A quick sense of like when you think about the environment, where are we at right now? In your sense.
Well, I want to agree with Sam. You can't overstate the importance of the Inflation Reduction Act. It's so important. It's going to do incredible things, and if we can get Biden reelected and go into a second term, we'll do even more. I want to talk about where I've gotten it right over the years, where I've gotten it wrong. From 1970 on, I've been very much. Oh, sorry, we're watching a little clip here.
No, I was gonna. I thought I had muted it. Hold on.
No worries.
Keep going. Keep going.
Yeah, there's a lot we got right back in 1970 when I started to take action on Earth Day. But one thing I won't say we got wrong, we didn't emphasize it right, because the problem is not going to be solved by geezers like me just buying energy efficient light bulbs and maybe even driving a green car. It takes more than that. And building upon once again what Sam said, there's good news I want to stress now. There's plenty of bad news to talk about, and he recognizes it, I recognize it. But the good news is, since 1970, when I started with the first Earth Day in the LA Air Basin, which is a tremendously big area, we have 4 times the cars, millions more people, but a fraction of the smog. How do we do that? We did it with people like me riding the bike and taking the bus and doing all that stuff and changing their light bulbs. All that's true. But I'm a photographer, so maybe people can relate. There's a device called a unipod. If you want to get a shot, you want your camera a little bit steadier. Something called a unipod. It's just one leg that telescopes out. You can get a steadier shot. A bipod, if you will, wouldn't do you much better. It's nothing. There'd be no sense to that. But a tripod, 3, gives you real steadiness. So you can build upon it and do important things with it. And that's how we did everything. That's how we cleaned up the air from 1970, bad air. And that is personal action, very important. And they're all related to intertied, of course. Corporate responsibility and good legislation. We did it with the Clean Air Act signed by Richard Nixon, of all people. That's how we did it. That's how we cleaned up the air in the basin. It wasn't just people riding the bike, taking the bus like I did. All that's important. And they related. Said, look, Ed's riding the bike and Ed's taking it. We need more bike lanes. We need more bus lanes. Legislation did that. The Clean Air Act helped all that. Corporate responsibility. They build cleaner power plants. They build cleaner buses and all that stuff. They're all related. It's not one thing just guys buying, compact fluorescent bulbs or whatever we did back in the heyday, the early days, but doing all of it together. Personal action, corporate responsibility, and good legislation. That's the most important thing to realize. They have to all be balanced, and you got to do them together. But Sam is right. There's plenty of good news, and the Inflation Reduction Act is the most important thing we could work on and keep in place, and in fact build on.
Well, and you mentioned the political reality. If you really take a systems approach to this problem, and you're not thinking that the most important question for the United States of this coming year on climate isn't COP29 or the details, it's who's president and who's in Congress. And for young people to think about not voting, including, if you have your own personal bias on some little issue, and if you're thinking not to vote or to get disengaged from the system this year coming up, particularly in the United States, that seems crazy to
It
me.
is crazy. I have friends, very young people, my children's age, young people being in their 40s, 30s and 40s, my grown kids' age. And I have a 24-year-old too. But some of them actually voted for Trump. They don't believe in anything he said, but they thought it was funny. They thought it was a funny joke to vote for somebody like that. They actually did that. They cast a real ballot in the real world, voted for Trump. They certainly regret it, and you won't get them to admit it on camera probably these days, but I know they did it because they told me they did it back in the day. They thought it was funny. They never thought he'd get elected. I didn't think he'd get elected. That's how naive we were about certain things. When Hillary, and others, chose not to go to Michigan, and he did, I said, what an idiot. He can't win Michigan. What it shows how smart we are and how stupid he is. Michigan, what's he going to do in Michigan? He's not going to change anything. Of course, that was one of the things that got him the presidency, was Michigan. We didn't think it was happening. Michael Moore told us it was happening. He was there on the ground watching it happen. We thought, no, we're not going to lose Michigan. United Auto Workers, we got Michigan locked up. No, we didn't. People were disgruntled. They're in these towns that are closed up shop. The kids are on opiates, and everybody's telling them they're a bad guy, a bad woman. And look what we got out of it. So we can do it. We just got to all work together. And I'm going to say it till people get it. The Inflation Reduction Act is the most important thing we can work on. Keeping it in place. Building. Thank you, Sam. Thank you both, by the way. And again, apologies to both for coming in here a shot out of a cannon. Thank you. I love everything I'm hearing from these brilliant young people. Thank you.
Me too. And thank you. I'm loving everything I'm hearing from the brilliant older people too. And you're doing a great job, Ed. Your book is, I've only just begun to read it because I'm always behind on everything. But your life has included many challenges and many gifts, and you do a great job of weaving them together. And I know you're dealing with a health issue now, Parkinson's, that people my age think about more and more. I'm surrounded by folks with various challenges like that. And I think about personal sustainability and how that relates to planetary sustainability. You look at both of those things and you sort of, there's lots of parallels there too. How do you make the most of the situation? Especially in cases like where you can't solve the problem. Solving Parkinson's, it would be great if that happens, but at the same time, we have to live with these things. I had a stroke in 2011. And it was a real wake-up call for me I thought about my stroke in terms of how I think about the planet. What can you change? What can't you change about your life and about our planetary life? And I think those are important things too.
The medical experts don't know for sure, but they're fairly certain that toxic elements, one of the key reasons people are having so many neurological problems now more than ever, Parkinson's, ALS, all these neurological diseases, MS, and they don't know for certain, but they're fairly certain that toxic elements have a lot to do with it. Well, when I was a young kid crawling on the floor, drank ant poison. I lived next door to a dry cleaner with perchloroethylene blowing in my window 364 days a year. They were closed Sunday. Well, that would make a lot, 6 days a week. Let me do the math later. But I worked over a trike tank, something called trichloroethylene or trike. I worked degreasing parts at this facility. There was no OSHA back then, no Cal OSHA, no OSHA. So there's no, overhead fan or anything. You just worked with the trichloroethylene tank, degreasing parts until the room started spinning. Ed, you got to take a break. I can see you stumbling. Go outside for 15 minutes, come back in and work again. That's just the way it was. And so I think, and will be proven out by medical experts, but there are many people that think toxic chemicals has something to do with diseases like that. And I certainly subscribe to that notion.
And what you just said, by the way, these are things that are going on elsewhere in the world in droves.
Right.
All the places around the planet where they don't have an OSHA. And I wrote my first environmental story in 1983. My first cover story was on the herbicide, the weed killer paraquat.
Oh boy.
Which is linked to Parkinson's now. But there were young field workers in Trinidad and elsewhere just spraying this stuff, without any of the protections that we now have. So those are really important issues too.
And I got my share of paraquat being a pot smoker back in that day.
Oh, right.
I
No,
don't-
that was one reason I was drawn to that story. It was controlling marijuana in Mexico at the same time.
And I talk about addiction in my book because it's part of my story. Let me be clear. This is a bit of an environmental book in many ways. I certainly talk about the environment, but it's a memoir and it's a humorous work. But a lot of stuff is very serious. And one of the most serious aspects of the book that you see the cover of behind me there, over on this side, sorry,
Yep.
is addiction. And we are likewise addicted to oil. We are likewise addicted to fossil fuels, like alcohol can do with people who are addicted and alcoholics or addicts. It gives you a great ride at first, but then it turns on you, and it turns on you bad, and everything that you think it gave you, it takes that away and more. That's the problem with fossil fuels. What a miracle. Look at what we've done. We built the Empire State Building with high sulfur coal, steel made from that. We built the George Washington Bridge. We did all these wonderful things, but we can't do that. We can't sit by and not say anything when other countries around the world, China and others, are doing the same thing. Well, you built all your Brooklyn bridges and all your 59th Street Bridge with high sulfur coal. What are you telling us to do?
Right.
They don't
Exactly.
have to do that. They got to leapfrog over that bad technology, get to better technology that makes more sense. And to a large degree, they're doing it. They're certainly building power, coal power plants and other things like that. But they're putting a tremendous amount of money into solar. And they're coming to us and asking us how we deal with some of these toxic chemicals too. They don't want people sick. When they're sick, they're unproductive. And so there's a lot of interest in many important things that we've been doing here. Now, finally, over years since we have ocean, some better rules in the EPA, and good, better environmental laws each year. So
Yeah.
we need to help the rest of the world grow, but to do it sustainably.
That's great. And now I want to circle back to the arts. And Ed, you've been involved in the theatrical arts forever. But let's just, I got to pull up a slide related to Yvonne's poetry and her background with a family that she grew up in the fossil fuel industry. And in a way, we all have grown up with fossil fuels in our family,
Yeah.
which is kind of what you were just saying. So, Yvonne, is there a particular poem you might want to recite for us?
Sure. I'll read you one called The Flower That Breaks Rocks. And this is a family poem. That image we had just a minute ago was my dad out on one of the North Sea platforms in the mid-80s. He was a young lad. There he is.
Yeah.
He's right at the top. He's the one at the front with the big grin. And I was really kind of fascinated and in some ways a bit troubled by the idea that this was the industry my father worked in, and he was the person whose gift to me was my love of the outdoors and my love of nature. And I've been thinking about how to reconcile those two ideas in a lot of my poems. I don't know if they are reconcilable, really. This is my poem, The Flower That Breaks Rocks. It's a simple poem and it's a family poem. And it's about being out on Ben Nevis, Scotland's highest mountain. He introduced his daughters to Ben Nevis. You take the bearing, line up the arrow, pointing to Moonlight Gully buttress, -1 gully. We didn't care until Dad found us a saxifrage. Its blooms were spokes of the North Star. Saxifrager means rock breaker, nivalis, snow saxifrage. Dainty alpinist, chinking her roots into fissures and fractures like crampons in toe holds. But I see now what he could only glimpse, that she and the other alpines, rose roots and pearlworts, are scrambling skywards till all that remains for them is cloud.
Beautiful.
Thank
Beautiful,
you.
Yvonne.
And again, this idea that your father, basically has that quality of taking you into nature, and also the practical reality of producing petroleum, which was and remains even as we make this transition. There's no swift way off these fuels. The addiction, the process of finding alternatives that can satisfy global energy needs. It means we can't get off of these fuels, certainly not gas, and even coal and some places. And so have you talked about this much with your dad over the years, that seeming discontinuity or those tensions?
Oh, yes. We used to discuss this when I was a teenager, and I'd say, Dad, isn't what you do polluting? And he'd go, oh, well, how did you get to college this morning? You went in the car, didn't you? So I knew that there was oil on my hands as well. I was a consumer of fossil fuels. And even when I didn't have a petrol fueled car and I tried to take the train everywhere, you know, my first book, this is my debut poetry collection. I don't know what's in the ink. Commercial ink is usually oil derived. And I discuss this with my mother quite often now. You know, I'm fascinated with all the stories she has about her time in Oman in the early 80s when she moved over there with my father. My dad has passed away now, so she's the source of a lot of my information about these ideas. And she went to see an oil drilling installation, which is absolutely fascinating. It's mad that she got to see one up close. I did as well as a child in Kuwait. And in some ways, it's quite a weird privilege to witness this kind of industry up close, because there is no way in Britain you could go out on a North Sea platform and just take a look, right? They'd think you're a terrorist, and it's a hazardous environment, tightly regulated. If you like, I can read you my poem, Frankincense, which is about my mother's career.
Absolutely.
Sure. Yeah, this is one for my mum. There are a lot of poems in memory of my dad in this book here, so I thought, oh, I'd better read one for my mum. Frankincense. My mother sounded Earth's deep architecture, listening for the fossil ocean's echo. This was 5 years before the ultrasound showed me on a grainy screen in Glasgow. She saw the thirsty shrub by a dry well, in a desert burnt white, the salt city's hinterland. Oil fields reek of tar, but Omani frankincense is the world's most fragrant, a scent that suggests the Magi trekking the desert from Persia to offer the tree's tears to a small god. Women in Salalah use it to perfume their linen, she told me, but it looked like a gorse bush, you know, the ones you see here on the common. Its twigs were barren, as if burnt. In winter, leaves break from the stems and white flowers unfurl.
Beautiful.
Beautiful.
That's
Again.
beautiful, Yvonne.
Thank you.
Extraordinary.
So Sam, let's get back to the world of blogging. You know, as I said earlier, I started blogging at the New York Times in 2007 on top of my conventional journalism, because I felt that the issues around me were so multidimensional that a simple news article can't capture it, and can actually distort reality. Again, as we were saying earlier, if the news is all the things that are bad, you end up conveying a flawed picture. And the other aspect of blogging that drew me through .earth, my blog, was it was multi-directional. It was not just me putting out article after article. It was interrogatory and open and implied in my own thinking that I don't know everything. And as a reporter, you know, we're too simplistically think, okay, now we got the story. and it's by having that kind of exchange function, I learned so much more. I kept calling myself, if you search online, if you Google for selfish blogger and my name Revkin, you'll find a lot of stuff I wrote, because everything that I was learning and unlearning. So I'd love to hear from you. I'm going to show your blog again in a second. I'd love to hear from you a little bit more about why you do this particular form, where you're drawing together a lot of content that isn't your own. You know, saying here you really need to read this, and this is why, that kind of stuff. So, what's your blogging philosophy, and what's, what do you hope for with your audience and the like?
Well, thank you for the question. It's a good question. A lot of possible answers. First, I just want to say I love the selfish blogger thing because that's how I feel too. Like, I feel like having a blog is a great excuse to get to talk to interesting people. Like, just to start with, like, I get to like say, "Hey, can I interview you for my blog?" And it's much more sort of. I do a lot of interviews too. This is my news roundup, and it's much more sort of likely to get a Zoom meeting than, "Hi, I just find you interesting. Want to chat?" Which is cool, but people are busy, and having a blog is a great way to just learn about people doing fascinating stuff and share their stories. Like, I've been able to meet scientists around the world doing fascinating stuff. A guy in the University of Bristol working on connecting fungi and electronics to create living environmental sensors that can interface with computers. There's a whole bunch of just fascinating work going on, and then just this fascinating stories like this one. A fleet of drones picking apples in Chile. And there's these things that almost sort of fade into the foreground. Like, there's tons and tons of stories in many newspapers about the rise of farm bots recently, robots that can do agricultural work. That part of the broader stories, like the rise of batteries and AI and a bunch of other technologies. But like, people often also, but that never makes the headlines because it's always sort of below the threshold of notice for being the most dramatic thing. Like Stephen Pinker in Enlightenment Now, he said, like, if there was a headline once a year, it would say stuff like, "These 5 amazing new technologies were invented, and this many hundreds of thousands of people rose out of poverty in South Asia." But there's always some kind of tragedy and tragedies are awful, and they should be reported on. But there's always some horrible thing that sort of draws all the eyeballs and the attention. And there's often really fascinating, positive stuff. People working hard to create a better world that doesn't get nearly enough attention. So I'm just trying to sort of curate some of the interesting things, some of the interesting ongoing threads that I'm noticing and share them with people. And I've found that it's really rewarding. And a lot of people have said they've found it really interesting. And I feel like doing it since 2017 now has really given me some perspective almost in seeing, wow, actually, in many domains, things have gotten better. In 2017, we were saying, hey, can we possibly decarbonize the grid? And now I just saw an article framed as a pessimistic article saying, well, of course we can decarbonize the grid. That's definitely going to happen. But is there any chance we can decarbonize heavy industry like steel and cement and stuff? And, I'm already seeing stories about people starting to find ways to decarbonize cemented steel. Like, there's electric arc furnaces making steel with a startup called Boston Metal. And in Sweden, they're using hydrogen as the power source for steel, like the heat source. So there's just a bunch of fascinating work going on that really doesn't get buried so much as ignored. Like, I got all. It's not. I'm not saying like the media is ignoring this. I got all these stories from the media. But they don't penetrate people's consciousness in the same way. And I think part of it is because on any given day, most of the stories on the headlines will be negative. So like that sort of adds up to a feeling that things are generally negative. And what I'm trying to do is sort of pick out all the positive stuff that's scattered in there, but on every single day gets sort of counterbalanced by too much negative, to sort of put it all together and say, look, there's actually a lot of positive. Look at all this cool stuff. So I'm trying to present really a more balanced and I think a more balanced perspective of how the world's going. And I'm trying to say, like I said earlier, that there actually is some amazing stuff happening. Like solar technology is now the cheapest electricity in history. Declined in price by over 85% since 2010. There's amazing global uptake of renewable technologies. It's going exponential. It's incredible, and we're getting tons of new cool renewable technologies too, like enhanced geothermal, where instead of just using an underground hot water deposit, you inject water underground to create your own hot water deposit, which means you can do it anyway. You can find a hot water deposit. Like enhanced geothermal just got connected to the U.S. grid for the first time in like September in Nevada as part of a project with Fulvo Energy and Google, and they're working on a 400 megawatt facility in Utah. Like, this amazing stuff happening. And I feel like, there was a Jerry Seinfeld special a while ago where he said like, and obviously politics is incredibly important too. The Biden administration has done incredible work in promoting renewables, but I'm not understating that at all. But there was a Jerry Seinfeld comedy special, I think, a while ago where he said like, do any of you remember voting on smartphones? This totally changed our lives. When did we decide that exactly? And like occasionally really huge societal changes happen, and somehow it just flips from being unthinkable to normal, and it seems like you can't tell exactly when.
Right.
And we are at that exact point right now with clean energy. Like, I've already seen, and I strongly disagree with this, but I've already seen like some environmental groups flipping straight from we totally need to go to clean energy at all costs to there's too much solar being built, it's a blight on the landscape. And I'm like, I'm sorry, you were talking about a climate crisis a minute ago. And I think that's because, you know, some entities sort of exist as an oppositional framework meant to sort of oppose things, and that's really useful if you're opposing fossil fuel projects, but it turns into a negative if you're opposing clean energy projects. And like Bill McKibben has been great on this. He's often the founder of 360.org. He wrote a great Mother Jones article saying it's time to embrace the green building boom, because we are having a green building boom. We are having manufacturing spending has doubled since the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act in 2022. There is just when I was a kid, there was this Tom Friedman book, That Used to Be Us, about how America has fallen behind in China on infrastructure and stuff, and China's still building lots of clean energy, but now we are too. We're really doing big things and really having a huge global decarbonization shift, and it's going way faster than even the most optimistic predictors would have expected. And I think
This
we'll
reminds
continue
me.
expectations.
Yeah, no, it's great. And this reminds me of one of Ed's points, I think, through the years, which is that individual action and decisions can matter enormously. I'm showing everyone Efficiency Maine's website for heat pumps, because Maine, where I moved to Maine 2 years ago with my wife to be near her mother, who's 91 and lives in a tiny lobster village where she was born, and during, you know, early in the Depression, and she just bought a heat pump. She's low income, you know, on a really tight budget, but the heat pump is going to help her get off of oil and lower her energy costs. She's still getting used to the idea. She was using it initially when the air conditioner, it was still hot at the end of the summer, and I think there's still this sense of you need a flame to be warm.
Right.
But to think that my mother-in-law, you know, for her, it was normal for her to buy a heat pump, and because this is you know, the Inflation Reduction Act is really slowly rolling out. This was just Maine's own incentives already, but that's a wonderful sign. So Ed, you know, that gets back to your points about local action, spreading what you do in your own life to your neighbors and the like. What do you think about that?
I think it's very important. You know, there's not time to go door to door for this stuff. So I applaud my friends who do, Greenpeace and others who do go door to door. There's a place for that, but we have to use the media, use it responsibly, because I feel like a performer. People always say, you know, you're a performer. We don't want to hear from you. We want to hear from the scientists. But if you are, in fact, a performer, you're about to do a song and dance on stage, and the fire marshal taps you on the shoulder. Excuse me, what is it? And he tells you there's a fire in the basement, not to panic people, but row by row to eventually evacuate. You know, it's just smoldering at this point, but we need to get people out in a timely manner. Go, thanks for sharing that, Mr. Fire Marshal. Time for my song and dance. You know, da 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 da. How could you possibly do that? You wouldn't do that. You do what the fire marshal said. That the fire marshal is a union of concerned scientists. The fire marshal are all those wonderful Nobel Prize winning people I've gotten to know at that organization and others who tell us what's really going on with air quality, with what's more efficient in the form of wind turbines and solar panels, what have you. They're studying it in a very careful way. They're publishing in peer-reviewed journals and what have you, so we know it's good science. And that's what we need to do. We can, as private citizens, you know, do whatever we do in our free time. And I wrote this memoir that's more entertaining than anything else, and I hope it's entertaining. But also, you know, to get the message out there, and you know, because we need to make people know that there are solutions and there is good news. And I love that you keep emphasizing that, Sam, because it's very important. We had a problem with CFCs years ago, is destroying the ozone layer. We had a big hole in the ozone. They stopped making CFCs. They said, the opponent said, you'll never be able to afford an air conditioner again. You'll never be able to afford a refrigerator. I've looked in the paper. I'm told they're still selling air conditioners and refrigerators, and it didn't cost that much more for either, you know, and it worked. And they did a huge amount of progress with that ozone hole and the ozone depletion. More good news. We had the Cuyahoga River catching fire near Cleveland, the Santa Barbara oil spill. That doesn't happen. The Santa Barbara oil spill kind of thing still happens in the Gulf and elsewhere. But the Cuyahoga River does not catch fire anymore because we made changes with the Clean Water Act also signed by Richard Nixon of all people. So we can do this together. It has to be bipartisan, nonpartisan, and we can do it. Just get people out there using the media responsibly with your wonderful poetry. There's nothing better than the arts talking about a good message, something like the environment. So I love that you melded those two, Yvonne. Just beautiful. And again, Sam, the
Thank
way
you.
you're spreading the word. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
And I want to ask now. I want to go around about one last thing, which is some of the skills and practices you all have when you think about how to spread them. Or what would you suggest, Sam? With you with blogging, like with me. I've been trying to run these shows for 3.5 years now since the pandemic. On a big chunk of them are on thriving online, like how to make the most of this noisy, polluted information system. Do you have any suggestions? Like, and I don't know how you fit your blog into your work life and the like too. So for young people who want to communicate, who want to share good ideas, do you have advice for how to do that and how to make it part of a life and how to make it practically part of a life? What are the barriers? What are your hopes?
Well, excellent question. Number one would be do it for you and don't expect to make money. So I have only ever indirectly made money from my blog, really. I have paid subscriptions and I'm trying to ramp that up. I would love to do more paid content. But primarily, the way that's been useful to my career is just by being able to point to prospective employers and say, look, I've done this every week for years. I care about this issue and I have a work ethic and stuff. So like it's been of indirect use. And it's sort of just become my resume over time. Like I have a resume, but a lot,
Right.
but like I put like links to my maps on there and all sorts of stuff. And I think it can be a blog or any kind of online presence or poetry or art or whatever your field is can be really useful in just sort of demonstrating that you care about something enough to do it. But I definitely think, don't quit your day job. Like so like definitely have a media platform where you can have a voice to in whatever medium or format you want to do that, to talk about things you care about. And I think that is great. And I think that will really help you in your career and in your life and in your human spirit. But this is a great map, but a bad example because I did this one for free. I did this one just for fun.
But it shows you. I like the idea of sharing your work. In other words,
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
sorry.
So yeah.
And what are you doing? You're working for the state of Maine right now, or?
Actually, I'm a freelancer, and I technically I'm my own business. Like I'm Sam Maddie GIS Consulting on my tax return, and I do freelance mapping projects for the state of Maine and several other clients, including Third Nature Investments, Sustainametrics, the Ocean Foundation, and some others. So like I actually a bunch of my recent maps aren't on here. I have a new post with a bunch of my maps from 2023 coming out in later December.
Great.
But yeah, actually, if you just go to maine.gov/climate-plan/dashboard. That was my big project for Maine for sort of the last quarter of 2023 was this dashboard of maps about some of the progress Maine has been doing on stuff, including the efficiency Maine heat pumps. Just I took some of that data and made sort of a geospatial format. And so yeah, this is how it is when it's embedded in the page. If you go further down to the bottom, there's a place where you can open it in its own window. If you open the dashboard in your browser, and if you go to any of them, there's just a bunch. There's just a bunch of different visualizations of all the cool stuff that's been happening lately in Maine. So yeah, it feels like an overall view of some of the cool stuff that Maine has built in the Mills administration. As with pretty much all of my visual web maps like this, if you click on the icons, you get more information, and you can zoom, pan, find your area, all sorts of stuff.
Wow.
So this is what I do for a living, basically. But having an environmental blog really helps me get projects like this because it shows that I really know my stuff and I care about it, and I'm kind of devoted to working on this on these issues. So but yeah, like sort of the skill that is my job is GIS mapping and analysis with stuff like this. And this is just a visual thing, which is great. There's also some more analysis heavy things like calculating sort of EV rebates per person by main town and stuff like that, and a whole bunch of other things. So
this is such an important part of the spreading the gospel of change is look what's happening right across our state, and if you're in Vermont, you say, wow, we should do this too, or having that connectivity and the data at hand, so you can zoom in and then having the practical reality, going to Efficiency Maine or whatever the equivalent is in another state to get your rebate, and to learn where the jobs are. You know, there's shortages of electricians and all the people who are needed to drive the actual works. So I just think this is great, and the more we can highlight the data as well as the good news, this is all part of the good news.
Yeah.
So
And yeah, electricians, absolutely. I have an article in my drafts folder about that I'm in the process of writing. If you really want to help fight climate change, become an electrician. We need more electricians.
that's right.
So yeah, this is actually a golden age for blue collar work, actually, in a lot of ways. We've
Absolutely.
automated lighting well before we've automated plumbing or electricity. So I think I think honestly, and given that everyone here is an author or writer of some sort, this is probably a really unpopular opinion, but I'm kind of trying to mentally prepare myself for it because it's unpopular for me too. I think there's an excellent chance that writing becomes something that it is impossible to really get paid for doing much in the next 50 years. That it becomes more like knitting or something. That it is like a hobby but not a career, and I think that's okay. Because it can still be fulfilling, and there can still be incredible human creation, human connection, and a discourse and a dialogue with the classics and all the amazing stuff we love about writing as part of a hobbyist community. And maybe part of what that means is a bit of a shift of sort of the intellectualization of work over the last few years. If you can have endless AI generated advertising content or even AI generated summaries of news or science papers or something, maybe that means people shift back to being more electricians or community gardeners or therapists or one-on-one tutors or a whole bunch of other stuff. Sometimes I joke that one of the big things we're doing with my newsletter is collecting a list of people who know who I am, so that they remember that this is someone who's not an AI. So that this is actually a human who's writing. But sorry, that's AI. That's
keeping that.
But the
humanness of us all.
Yeah, but I have more thoughts to say. I'm actually really excited about AI and some of its potential for science. But yeah, I think what I would encourage for young people is flexibility. Is don't take on student debt. I was very fortunate enough to avoid that. And be sort of open to experience, try new things, take risks, take experiments. Don't bet everything on I will definitely do this and this will definitely become my career. Do stuff if you think it would be valuable and fun and interesting and you want to do it. Give it a try. If it grows, double down on it. If it doesn't, try something else. I would encourage flexibility, open-mindedness, and experimentation, basically.
How does that feel, Yvonne, from the standpoint of your focus on creative writing?
Yeah, fantastic. I think it's wonderful to have so many options and ideas ahead of you. I've got quite a few colleagues who are branching out into teaching people how to write gaming narrative, who are experimenting with AI to write poems. And it all sounds like a really, really fascinating new frontier for us. But
you've also done film.
I have, yeah. I think this is an important medium.
Where is this, by the way?
Mountain hares are Britain's only true Arctic alpine mammal.
This is in the Cairngorm Mountains in Scotland, and you can see the rest of it on YouTube.
They were here before any other species of hare or rabbit.
So thanks so much for showing that clip. In terms of practical things that people can do, whether that's through raising awareness by using the arts and media and writing, or whether that's actually taking practical action. What I heard about with Alex Demansky, the filmmaker who filmed this and directed it, was, you know, that the mountain hare ecologist we spoke to was saying, people can restore the moorland vegetation. Something I mentioned in the article that we put out to accompany the film is tree planting. Very, very simple, very local, very cheap. You know, I've got a load of acorns on my balcony that I've taken from an oak tree that are going to go in little pots this spring. I even have some poems about planting trees and literally raising little oaks from seed in my book. It's so simple just to take these very, very small practical steps. Everybody can do their bit. And there's something I really do love about planting and growing and nurturing things. I think it's absolutely wonderful to plant trees. It's just so fascinating. I think children should do it. Grown-ups should do it. It's for everyone.
Great. Well, you've all planted trees, symbolically and practically speaking, I think, by innovating as communicators, by taking your prominence as a public figure and an actor, and bringing in environmental progress, and passion and sense of purpose beyond the simple things that we do to get through life. So I'm really appreciative that you've all been able to join this informal little get together here at the end of an extraordinary year, and in this emerging era, the Anthropocene, or whatever you want to call it. You know, back in 1992, when I wrote that book where I talked about the Anthropocene, basically it was goofy. I didn't know there were technical words like putting anthropo instead of Anthropocene, but I was talking about the reality that Earth has become a place that will be shaped henceforth by one species. You know, and it's not the first time. Cyanobacteria, these little plants, changed the planet profoundly. There was a great oxygen catastrophe when photosynthesis emerged, and they made life really hard for the organisms that had grown up in an environment without oxygen. But the weird thing is, we know it. I mean, we're starting to understand it, and that's, you know, that's like we're looking around going, oh wow, we really are a force, a global force. We're changing the chemistry of the oceans, the atmosphere. We're changing climate. And how we deal with that creatively, how we incorporate those questions into our daily lives and our work is really important. And especially integrating across the complexities, you know, your relationship with your dad, Yvonne, you know, through his fossil fuel interest, but getting the natural wonder and love that you shared. That's really special. And Ed, it's just great to see you again, and good luck with your book. And with your work going forward, both the humor and the acting and the activism. And Sam, I'm really glad I found you on our Substack universe. I'm there too, revkin.substack.com, and you're at sammati.substack.com, as I showed the thing before. And maybe we can revisit sometime. I hope you're the end of your years this year is thriving and bountiful for all of you. And this is a Sustain What webcast. You can subscribe, as I said a minute ago. And I'm just going to keep these conversations going as long as I can. I don't get paid for this anymore. I used to be at Columbia University. Now I'm just a semi-retired journalist who likes to share and shape ideas using conversation. So that's what Sustain What is about. And thanks again. Good luck with have a good day too.
Thank you so much, everybody. Thanks.
so much, Andy.
Lovely to meet you.